The goal of the mentor is not to be right. The goal of the mentor is not to be the smartest person in the room. The goal of the mentor is not to get their way, right? So start with some things that are nots. And really, as a mentor, your goal is to help the mentee learn how to learn, understand how to work through the problems they have, help them navigate challenges, provide a lot of empathy and support in a challenging situation. Give them a sense of agency around whatever's happening.
Welcome to another episode of Outsider Inc. I'm your host, Ian Hathaway. Today's guest is Brad Feld, a legendary figure in venture capital and entrepreneurship, and a pioneering voice behind a worldwide startup community revolution. His Give First philosophy has reshaped how ecosystems around the world think about innovation, mentorship, and building companies with purpose. Brad's journey spans decades of influence. He launched his first company, Feld Technologies, as a student at MIT and later became an early-stage investor at SoftBank and Mobius Venture Capital. As a co-founder at Foundry, he redefined founder-friendly investing and helped put Boulder, Colorado on the map as a thriving startup hub, a place that consistently proves that world-class companies can emerge far from Silicon Valley. Brad also co-founded Techstars, one of the most unique and impactful startup investors worldwide. Built on the belief that mentorship matters more than money and that talent is more ubiquitous than opportunity, Techstars has backed more than 4,000 companies across dozens of countries around the globe. Through acclaimed books like Venture Deals and Startup Communities, Brad has made the worlds of venture capital and entrepreneurship more accessible to countless founders. His latest book, Give First, distills the philosophy that has guided his career, that by helping others without expecting anything in return, we build stronger companies, relationships, and communities. But Brad's impact goes far beyond business. Through his candid and open writing on mental health, relationships, and leadership, he's helped shape a more human and sustainable vision for entrepreneurial life, proving that ambition and vulnerability can go hand in hand. And on a personal note, Brad has been more than just an inspiration to me. He's been a trusted mentor, a fierce supporter, and a loyal friend. His encouragement and counsel has meant the world to me in countless ways, both big and small. I couldn't be happier to have this conversation with him now and to share it with our listeners. Brad Feld, welcome to the show.
I'm fearlessly and legendarily here. I recorded that for my mother. She's going to be so proud of me.
Oh, good. Well, I'm thrilled to have you here, Brad. As I was thinking about the many paths we could take for this episode, a friend asked me, Brad is pretty well known. What is it that you want others to know about him that don't have the chance to know him privately? And my answer was something to the effect of, I just wish that people knew what a great person he is, that underneath all of the success and notoriety and ideas and knowledge you've put into the universe, that you're just one of the most thoughtful, generous, and caring people I've known. And so my desire is to make this episode more about Brad the human rather than Brad the highlight reel.
Sounds way more fun because I'm so tired of Brad the highlight reel. Tell me how you got started as an entrepreneur. It's like, I refer you to these 27,000 YouTube videos.
Good. Okay, Brad the highlight reel is officially dead. So Brad the human, with that, I want to start with a quote you shared with me a long time ago that has gotten me through some tough days. They can't kill you and they can't eat you. Tell us about the origin of that comment and why it means so much to you.
So I heard that from Len Fassler. Len, who passed a few years ago, bought my first company when I was 28. He was about 60. And I would say that experience of getting to know Len changed the trajectory of my life in many ways. But the biggest impact on the trajectory was how I thought about other people in the context of business. Len was super successful. He had been a lawyer. He became an entrepreneur. He had a partner, a guy named Jerry Pock, who's also a longtime friend and has had a lot of influence on me. The company that bought mine, which was a company that ended up being called Ameridata, at the time it was called Sage Alerting Systems, was really the first time that I engaged with anybody on a deal front. So I ended up on this path with Jerry and Len, and eventually Len and I started a couple of companies together. I learned how to do deals from both of them, but especially sort of Len taking me under his wing. And we had created a company that ultimately became called Interliant. And what happened along the way was the internet bubble. So we started a company together. We built this very significant scaled up business, went public, was worth at the peak $3 billion when $3 billion was a lot of money. And then the internet bubble burst and misery began. And I was a venture capitalist at this point. So I wasn't just co-chairman of this company with Len, but I was also on a bunch of boards. But we were spending just an enormous amount of time trying to cut the company back, get it back to a normal size, deal with all the losses that we had, figure out how to navigate financing, just hard stuff. And I was at Len's house. I would stay there when I would go to Purchase, New York, which is where the company was headquartered. And as I sat with Len in the evenings, the emotional intimacy of the wind down at the end of the day was pretty substantial. We were both tired. He was now obviously older. He didn't need to be doing this, but he was doing this every single day, totally in this with me, trying to figure out how to navigate through the shit show. And the quote came from a morning where I woke up and I did not sleep well the night before. I remember it pretty well. I didn't sleep that well on a lot of nights. I didn't sleep that much because there's just so much shit flying around everywhere. And this time period is 2001, 2002. And I'm sitting at his breakfast table in his house in Harrison, New York. I really was not motivated. You have those mornings where your engine doesn't get started. So I'm drinking my cup of coffee. I'm gnawing on a bagel that I haven't even bothered to put in a toaster because I'm just so despondent. And most of the way I feel that morning is I just don't want to fucking do anything. I don't want to go out the door. I know what's in front of me. I know that there's a bunch of stuff that I got to deal with. And I'm certain that there's a bunch of stuff I don't know about that's crappy that's going to come at me because every day was just another pile of new bad. And so Len, think of a Jewish Yoda, he was always short, 5'4", 5'5". He had curly ear hair and he came in the kitchen and I remember him sort of stopping and looking at me and saying, "You okay?" And I said, kind of whined, right? Like whiny little kid. I didn't sleep that well and today's going to suck. And he looked at me and he just said, "Brad, they can't kill you and they can't eat you." And it kind of paused and then he said, "Come on, suit up. Let's get going." I mean, I went from going, ugh, to laughing out loud, okay, let's fuck it. Let's go. It's whatever it is, it is. And I mean, for 25 years, I've carried that around with me whenever I've had to deal with hard stuff, which is they can't kill you and they can't eat you. The hard stuff is hard. It's no fun. I'm not happy about it. A lot of times it's really emotionally stressing in many different ways. But as Len said, it's just stuff. Deal with it.
I love that. Len is obviously a big part of your story and your new book that's coming out, I think officially at the end of June. Some folks have had a chance to snag a copy. I'm happy to say I'm one of them. Enjoyed it very much. The book is called Give First, The Power of Mentorship. I want to dive into the book specifically in a minute, but I'd like to level set on a couple of key concepts. First and foremost, we've talked about the term mentorship. What does that term mean to you and why is it so important?
Mentorship is a word that I hadn't thought hard about in terms of what it meant and how it worked until we started Techstars in 2006. So prior to that, I'd had lots of experiences, both being a mentee and being a mentor. And I had plenty of what I now call peer-mentor relationships, where you have a mentor-mentee relationship, but eventually you become peers. But I hadn't thought hard about what it actually meant. I knew the word from a corporate environment where people would talk about, when you're working your way up through a corporate hierarchy, you need to have a mentor. But I didn't ever really relate to it in a tangible way. So we started Techstars in 2006, and David Cohen and I are talking about this idea of how do we help these startups in a way that really gives them leverage. And the idea for Techstars, the concept of accelerator didn't really exist at the time. There had been this whole incubator phase in the internet cycle, in the internet bubble. But by 2002, 2003, all the incubators, including one that we had at SoftBank, were dead. A year or two before we started Techstars, a thing called Y Combinator got created, where the idea was that they were funding a collection of very early stage companies. And that was the idea that caught David's attention. He's like, "Wow, that's interesting. I've been doing some angel investments. It's super unsatisfying. I give people some money and then they never call me back." and I can't really help them, and I don't really know how to engage with them, and I don't know who the other investors are. And I had done a lot of angel investing, so I had my own view on what was effective about it. But he said, what if we got like a critical mass of companies together, like 10, and funded them together and got them all together for the summer and spent like 3 months working with them day in and day out. Not to invest at this point, but just to like engage. And from that came this concept of mentorship. And we labeled it mentorship. And we said, Techstars is a mentorship-driven accelerator. That language came about pretty quickly. And the idea was, let's get a bunch of people we know that are founders, that are potential investors, maybe some service providers, and let's just surround these companies with those people. They weren't just local in Colorado. And a lot of them didn't know each other. So you sort of observe the mentors working with each other. And so sort of this notion of a nascent community evolving. So I give that backstory because it wasn't like I sat down or David Cohen sat down and said, here's what mentorship is, here's how it works. It was like this hypothesis that surrounding founders at the very earliest stages of their companies with a lot, not just like one expert, one guru, but a bunch of people that could help in different ways. And then learning how what they did was either effective or not effective was important as part of the generation of this. Now, I use the word guru. We separated the constructs pretty early between a mentor-driven accelerator, which we were, and a guru-driven accelerator, which Y Combinator was and several others that emerged were, where there were a handful of very smart and very capable people, but they kind of were the gurus. They kind of told the founders, these are the things you should do, versus this other approach, which was there were plenty of gurus in the mentor group, but it was pretty explicit, like don't tell people the answer. Help them learn how to figure out the answer. Don't make declarative statements. Be Socratic. Use a lot of questioning to try to get to the root cause of the thing versus using your experience to make an assertion. And as it evolved, by 2010, so 4 years later, I guess, there were a dozen, 15 of these ideas that we were constantly talking about. And David sat down and then wrote this thing called the Techstars Mentor Manifesto in 2010, which had 18 items on it. And he started to use that as Techstars expanded to codify and explain and help people understand like how to be effective as a mentor. And that's where it came from.
Okay. So in the book, you go deeper on the Techstars Mentor Manifesto, other ways of engagement, just at a high level, maybe an abstraction. What makes for a great mentor?
Well, a couple things. One is the goal of the mentor is not to be right. The goal of the mentor is not to be the smartest person in the room. The goal of the mentor is not to get their way, right? So like start with some things that are nots. And really as a mentor, your goal is to help the mentee learn how to learn, understand how to work through the problems they have, help them navigate challenges, provide a lot of empathy and support in a challenging situation, give them a sense of agency around whatever's happening. And so, for example, one of my really critical things that I say, and I say this as a board member, most of what I say is just data. I'm not telling the CEO what to do ever. I'm giving the CEO data. It's the CEO's choice. It's the CEO's call. I have a line I like to use, especially in private companies, especially in boards that are dysfunctional, especially with founders who are deferential to boards or board members. I say, look, as long as I support you, I work for you. My goal is to help you succeed. That's it as a board member. If I don't support you, it's my job to do something about it. So at some point, you lose support of the founder. You start to question whether the CEO is the right person, whatever. It's my job to do something about it. And that does not mean fire you. That means work to try to get back to a place where I support you. But I have to engage around that. Ultimately, the tool I have, if I don't feel like I'm going to get back to a place where I support you as a major investor, as a board member, is to replace you. So sort of this notion, if you tie it back around, that the mentor, is even less powerful than an investor board member. And that the notion of the mentor is really their job is to help that mentee, founder, CEO, executive, whoever they're mentoring, be successful at whatever path that person wants to go down And frankly, as a mentor, if you're not interested in the person or the path or the domain or the topic or the thing they're doing, don't engage as a mentor with that particular person or topic or thing.
Yeah. Well, so on that note of being helpful, give first as a concept that originated from your 2012 book, Startup Communities, where you talked about this concept of giving before you get. You wrote, and I quote, "One of my deeply held beliefs to the secret of success in life is to give before you get. In this approach, I am always willing to try to be helpful to anyone without having a clear expectation of what's in it for me. If over time the relationship is one way, for example, I'm giving but getting nothing, I'll often back off on my level of give because this belief doesn't underlie a fundamentally altruistic approach. However, by investing time and energy upfront without a specifically defined outcome, I have found that over time, the rewards that come back to me exceed my wildest expectations." End quote. Tell us what inspired you to write that back in 2012, how that concept has evolved over time, and what Give First means today.
Sure. In that book, which was, 200 pages, like that was one little section on one little page. And I didn't really think that much about it when I wrote it. It was trying to underscore how to get a positive feedback loop going in a startup community. So I was less focused in the book on the notion of what became Give First, and I was more focused on here's how you get that positive feedback loop moving. You try to get a bunch of people to put energy into the system non-transactionally. They do not know what they're going to get back. They don't define upfront what they're going to receive, but they're willing to make the investment of energy, time, whatever the resource mix is, and they're willing to stay with it, kind of keep putting energy in. And in the context of a startup community, if you get enough of that happening, all of a sudden the flywheel starts to turn and stuff starts to happen. And things start to emerge out of the startup community, which, of course, when you and I wrote The Startup Community Way and characterized startup communities as complex adaptive systems, like all of a sudden that concept like snapped into place. Like it made sense why that was so powerful because you were creating this input into the system. I played around with that more and more out of that book. A couple things happened that made me start to focus on it more. I described in that book that was my personal philosophy. I'd been behaving that way for a long time. And I kind of always approached it with my worst case was I'd learned something. So I sort of entered into a lot of new relationships where, sure, let's just go. Let's see what happens. I also learned from it personally, the best way to learn whether you want to really engage with someone or not is to do stuff. It's not to try to figure out what the relationship is economically in advance, but it's just to start doing stuff. Another thing that happened was Adam Grant came out with a book called Give and Take. And it came out about 6 months to a year after I came out with Startup Communities. And it basically categorized individuals on a spectrum from givers to takers. And it wasn't absolute. You're either a giver or a taker, but there's a spectrum. And he did a bunch of academic research and made a pretty compelling argument that people who are givers are more successful than people who are takers. I got to know Adam and we talked about each other. And there's a lot of back and forth between us about the idea I had of give before you get and his idea of give and take. And that emerged into me starting to think more about it as a life philosophy and a way of being, which we were essentially codifying in Techstars. And for me, it evolved into clarity on the way I try to comport myself, and I'm not perfect, I screw up all the time, but the way I try to comport myself, and then to draw a through line back to Len, like it was the essence of that guy. It's not generosity, it's not altruism, it's not charity. Those things are fine, but that's not what it is. It's that you're just willing to engage and see where it goes and not have to have a defined outcome. And to do that consistently as a way of being, which then leads to a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you say that's the essence of Len. I certainly think that's the essence of you as well. In the book, you define it specifically as give first means being willing to put energy into a relationship or a system without defining the transactional parameters. However, it's not altruism. You can and should expect to get something back, but you don't know when, from whom, in what form, or over what time frame. Question I have on that, why is it not just the first part of that. Why the second part? Why does it have to not be about pure altruism? Just the promise of ROI, is that required to get people to act generously? Can doing good be good enough? Or why did you feel like you needed to have that second part?
I wanted to define it uniquely from the notion of charity, philanthropy, altruism, all which are also deep values of mine, which you know. But my wife, Amy, and I have a foundation. We don't have any kids. I don't believe in the concept of legacy. I think that the experience that one has is the experience while one's alive. And I want to get as much out of that experience as I can. And I want to contribute as much as I can to things I think that are aligned with my value system while I'm aligned. And so, for example, our goal is not to die with a bunch of money in our foundation. Our goal is to die not penniless. We live a good life and we're very comfortable and we support lots of family members and lots of organizations, but we have no aspiration to have a pile at the end. But in this concept, I didn't want it to be, oh, well, give first is just charity or give first is just altruistic. It's you do get stuff back from it. Oh, by the way, if you are always operating in this mode and you're not getting anything back, you can't continue to operate in this mode. I mean, one of the startup community challenges that you and I both ran into and talked about in the second book, and I touched on it in the first book, is people who just keep putting energy into the startup community but aren't getting any benefit from it, where their definition of benefit is getting paid. And, there are some people who really love being involved in a startup community and being a leader in a startup community, but don't have financial resources, either a job or resources from a successful company that they've done or whatever, to do that without actually getting some compensation, because you got to actually, at the end of the day, go to the grocery store and buy food.
Yeah.
And so one of the problems in startup communities is the person who is a really, really great contributor with a fantastic energy and attitude and plays a great leadership role, and then 2 years later hasn't made any money from it and says, this sucks because I'm not getting anything back. And that's a misuse of the construct. In addition to it being a misuse of the construct, like, it's easy to say to them, look, you can't make this 100% of your life. It's not a free job.
Yeah.
You're not doing a job that doesn't pay you. You're contributing 10% of your time, 20% of the time, but you have to have other things going on if you're going to do this kind of stuff. So it's sort of getting those things aligned. I think the last sort of driver of why it's different is I think philanthropy is incredibly powerful, but it's a separate construct. And I really wanted to give people something accessible that was not, okay, cool, Brad, that's neat. Now let me put that in the nonprofit part of my brain, and I'll go, when I do my nonprofit-y things, I'll behave this way. But when I behave in the world of for-profit, everything I'm going to do is transactional, and the ideas are stupid and don't bother. The last piece of it, another comment which is important, I use the word transactional. This does not say, give first does not mean that you have zero transactional engagement in your world.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a venture capital investor. I've had people say to me, oh, cool, give first. So why don't you give me the $5 million? And, when you're successful, I'll give you something back. And I'm like, that's not how it works. Right. So it's not the elimination of transactional activity. It's a shift in personal behavior around the context of a lot of things where the transactional definition up front inhibits or eliminates the ability to make progress.
I can say for a fact that, at least certainly in the startup community domain, this has fed me much more than I've given. Go to a city, they want you to give a talk. At first, I'm like, I want to fill my day with meetings with founders. How can I help? What can I do to contribute? They're a little confused about, well, what do you want out of that? Other than no, I'm here to help. But the relationships, the connections, the information that has spawned from all of that has fed me far more than I felt like I fed them. So can't underscore that enough. It's a real thing. Onto the book itself. This is your 9th book. Of those 9, this is just your 2nd, where you are the sole author. The others had at least one co-author. I know this one has been a long time coming. It's taken a few turns along the way. It's great to see it finally in existence. Just on the book itself, why now? What was the journey like? And what do you hope that it accomplishes?
Well, I'll start with the last one first, because my goals for something like this are really simple, which is I have a set of ideas and language around a set of ideas that I just want to get out in the world. And to the extent that they're useful to people, people adopt them. And when I think about a couple of the other books, Venture Deals, for example, which is to this day an extraordinarily popular book, I think really helped many, many people who are trying to understand how these deals work. Somebody new to it that's trying to get up the curve, somebody who's trying to, navigate through the noise. It's given them a very accessible way to do it that's enduring, right? 15 years later, it's still an extremely popular book. It's in its fourth edition. We've continued to update it, but those ideas are really out there in a way that makes venture capital and venture capital deals accessible. Startup Communities was all around this idea of the global democratization of entrepreneurship. With Techstars, all of a sudden, I'm like, I'm so done with this idea that the only place to start a company is Silicon Valley. I'd been done with that for a long time, but I was really kind of sick of it coming out of the financial crisis because there was so much, I think, lack of understanding in 2010 about how entrepreneurship worked and what was the importance of it and where it evolved to. And the motivation for the book was, hey, there's some amazing stuff happening here in Boulder. I think that's generalizable. I think if I'm correct, that will become something that really impacts a lot of people around the world. And it has. So the phrase startup communities didn't exist before the book. People called them entrepreneurial ecosystems. They called them innovation clusters. They called them a bunch of words that I thought were kind of inaccessible to founders and didn't really capture the essence of something where the founder was at the heart of it. So that's my goal. That's my goal with this book, that this encapsulates this notion and this philosophy around give first that I have. The journey was a interesting one. As you know, I'm a writer and I learn from writing, but I'm also very busy with other stuff. And so I'm not the kind of writer that has lots of blocks of time to sit down and write. I have to make myself make time to write. And it's not a straight line for me. It's a very choppy sort of experience when I sit down and try to make progress through a book. And I've learned a lot about that now over 9 books. So with this book, I got to the place where I had a first draft. And the first draft, the seed corn of it, was my blog, where I wrote 18 blog posts, 1 blog post for each of the Techstars Mentor Manifesto items. But I used that as the starting point. So I took them and I started writing around it. And I ended up writing this first draft of a book over probably a year that was give first and mentorship stuff. I sent it out to about 25 people. I got a lot of feedback. And when I distilled the feedback out, there were 2 things that were points of feedback for me. One was that I jammed 2 books together. I had a book on give first and a book on mentorship. It's like I had 2 books in a book. It wasn't a book. And I kind of knew that when I sent it out to people, but I was kind of like, fuck it, I'm done. I've written enough words. I need to just get this out there and get some feedback. The second major piece of feedback I got was some version of too much Techstars, not enough Brad. I had really woven a lot of Techstars stories into the book and plenty that had nothing to do with me. And this also coincided with a time where I was really tired. I hibernated for about 2 years. It was around the time that I had sent out for feedback of this book. I stopped all public-facing stuff. I stopped blogging. I stopped doing podcasts. I stopped showing up doing public events. I just needed a break after 30 years of a lot of engagement with a lot of people in lots of places. But I focused my energy in a non-public way. So 2 things happened. One is I realized I had a lot of work to do to get from this draft to a book that I felt proud of. And the second is I really just kind of didn't fucking want to do anything out with anybody around the book. And so if you go back to the point of the book in the first place, which is to get the ideas out in the world, it was kind of like, I have dissonance here. So I said, you know what? I'm putting it on the shelf. I deleted my folder from Chrome that had a couple of things that I was linked to in writing. And I put a little star next to the Google Doc so I would be able to find it quickly if I ever wanted to look at it again. And I deleted all the things that I was going to do next. I just said, yeah, it's in a box, it's on the shelf. Maybe I'll take it down someday. About a year ago, David Cohen, who is one of the co-founders of Techstars, he stepped back in as CEO. And as part of him stepping back in as CEO after a 3-year break, I committed to him that I would really, even though I was not interested really in being particularly public because I was still in hibernation, I would engage with him really in a significant way, again, around Techstars. And after I kind of made that commitment, I said, let me take this book off the shelf and let me see what I think about it. And I reread it. And I'm like, there's there's a lot of really good stuff in here, but there's a lot of fucking work to turn it into a book. And so I started working on it. I worked on it through the end of the year. I restructured the book. And Ian, you know this because when we did Startup Community Way, you remember that moment when it was a November timeframe. I was at Rancho and we just completely restructured the book. Like we had all the writing, but it was just like the things were in the wrong place. And we came up with a 2x2 grid and we just moved everything around. And then we still had to write a whole bunch of stuff to smooth it all out and make it all fit together. I did the same kind of thing. Like I just sort of took all the pieces and I said, okay, here are all the pieces. How do I want to organize it? And that resulted in a book rather than two things jammed together.
Shifting gears to this show's theme, which is about outsiders. I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but my production team told me that a few weeks ago when we were scheduling this episode, I was sort of describing you in a way that I said, if Warren Buffett is the Oracle of Omaha, Brad Feld is the Oracle of outsiders. I have zero recollection of saying that, but these guys are pretty honest, so I believe them. And I think it's actually true. You know, sort of looking back at your life, at first glance, you're not the most obvious choice to hold that mantle. You grew up in a nice suburb in Dallas. You went to MIT. You built and sold multiple successful tech companies at a young age. You were a rising star in the Boston tech ecosystem by the early 1990s. And yet, this consistent theme over your career, which I think is perhaps the most defining characteristic of it, is being inclusive, providing inroads for others and access to opportunity to people who have fewer connections and opportunities. And you've consistently and intentionally inverted power dynamics to help other people get ahead. There's three streams of your work that I wanted to discuss. You've already hinted at all of these: venture deals, startup communities, and Techstars. But I think it would be difficult to discuss those without taking a quick pit stop and mentioning your decision to leave Boston in 1995 and move to Boulder, which was a little bit of a sleepy tech outpost, especially compared to a thriving ecosystem like Boston. And also, you and Amy didn't really know anybody there. So maybe tell us a little bit about the consequences of that decision, maybe what happened over those first 5 or 10 years, and how it changed you as a person and set you on this course for how most people today know you.
I think to answer that, it's useful for me to do a little preamble. I grew up in Dallas. My dad was a doctor. My mom was an artist. And it was a very comfortable childhood, sort of classic upper middle class experience. But I was a Jewish kid in a high school of 2000 where we had 4 Jewish kids. High school was a good experience, but I definitely had the experience of feeling like the other in the room in a number of different situations as a kid. And, you know, they were around things like Christmas, which we didn't celebrate, or I've got funny holiday names where I get days off from school, you know, things that today probably I think would be labeled microaggressions, like my nose is big and stuff like that. I also am a hermit. I mean, I love being alone. I love like laying on the couch and reading a book versus being with a big group of people. I had a lot of friends and I hung out with my friends and did lots of things, but I was a nerd. I was one of the smart kids. I was also a long distance runner, right? My social circles were kind of weird as a kid, even in that environment. Amy grew up in Alaska. And so she came from this little town. She grew up in Fairbanks. She grew up in a family with no resources. They didn't have any money and they didn't have any resources. So sort of did their best to make it in day in, day out. We ended up in Boston. She went to Wellesley. I went to MIT. And she describes going to Wellesley as close as she could come to going to college in a foreign country that just happened to speak English. Like it was a totally otherworldly thing for her. As a kid that showed up at MIT in cowboy boots and was proud of his cowboy boots, it was a pretty different kind of thing for me. And Boston ended up being a great place to live for us. It was really good to us at lots of levels, including, you know, very financially successful from creating that first business. But it was never home. It never felt like home. And when I got to school, I was like, yeah, Texas is great. I'm always going to live in Texas. I'm always going to live in Dallas. It's the most awesome place ever. And within a year, the real estate crash in Texas happened because the price of oil went from like $40 a gallon or $50 a gallon to $10 a gallon. And Dallas was not a great place to be. And Texas was not a great place to be in 84 and 85 and 86 when that version of the oil crash had happened. And I also now I'm living in Boston, which is this incredibly multicultural place. Like Dallas was not. And all of a sudden I'm in the middle of my fraternity that I lived in, which is now a society because we've gone co-ed. At the time, I like to say we were 10% of everything. Like choose your nationality, choose your religion, choose your sexual orientation, choose your whatever. I didn't know there were 10 different kinds of sexual orientations, but there are. We had it was just like a mix of everything. And that was awesome. Like for me, it was just like, whoa, like these are just people. They're just on this planet. They're interesting. They're totally different than me. Some are similar. There's some overlap. There's some differences. And we got to figure out how to live in this place together, all 60 of us, and make progress. Against the backdrop, by the way, of an academic environment, MIT, which was just fucking brutal every single day. It was incredible. The experience of going to school there is amazing because if you get out of it, you know how to think. You know how to learn. Because that's the only way you'll survive is to figure out how to get through those things. So that's the preamble. I sold my first company at 28. Amy said to me, we should think about moving somewhere else. I said, look, by the time I'm 30, we'll be out of here. And then I promptly forgot that I made the commitment and thought nothing of it because I was very, very busy with the acquirer, and Len had me and Jerry had me flying all over the place. And I was now on the deal team and I was doing technical diligence on stuff. About 2 months before I turned 30, Amy said, I have decided to move to Boulder, and you are welcome to come with me if you'd like. Now, it's important to realize we were married.
Yeah.
and we really loved each other. We were very close. And I'm like, huh. And I was in a position where I could, because I no longer had a managerial job that required that I be in Boston because my company had been absorbed into this much, much, much bigger company. And I was really a line executive at this point. And so 2 months later, we moved to Boulder. And I really started from scratch in the end of 1995, starting to sort of figure out my way around Boulder. And I had a couple of different ways that I found other people like me who were founders, including some things I had done in Boston. And I just did those things in Boulder and just started reaching out and finding people that were also founders of companies. And all of a sudden I had friends, and our friends begat friends, and stuff went from there.
Of course, Boulder is where lots of exciting things happen for you. You became a prolific blogger. Feld Thoughts. 2005, you wrote a series on venture term sheets. By late 2006, early 2007, you and Jason Mendelsohn would formalize that with this Ask the VC platform. And in 2011, you published Venture Deals, which you alluded to before. You've already hinted at ways in which that helped founders, right? It demystified venture capital, which is notoriously opaque. It was accessible and educational, and it really gave entrepreneurs the tools and the knowledge they needed to more effectively navigate the dark arts of VC. But I don't think everyone loved that you were doing that, right? It felt like maybe you were giving away the playbook. You were too founder friendly. You were commoditizing this thing that, again, VCs like to operate in the shadows. Is that true? I would imagine it is. And B, why did you do it anyway?
Yeah, there was certainly an element of that was significant at that time. The emails I got from other VCs saying some version of why the fuck are you telling everybody how we do things? I think many of those VCs today would say, no. It's really good that everybody knows how to do it because it makes it easier to get stuff done, which is an entertaining and ironic dynamic around the whole arc of everything. It really came initially from a source of frustration, which was having been involved in a pretty early, simple deal with a founder who had a lawyer that had no experience with doing VC deals and had a couple of, I don't know whether I would call them advisors or mentors, who were giving the founder some very bad information around terms in a situation of a pretty straightforward, non-controversial deal. And I actually saw the founder the other day and we had reminisced about it, where he had an angel investor who was his previous investor that almost blew up the deal with us. I tried to remind people it's angel investing, not devil investing. It wasn't even like our terms were problematic. The person was trying to extract things for themselves from the founders in the context of a new investment that was going to help the company make progress from that initial investment. And by the way, that company ended up, I think, for us being a 3X. So for the angel, it ended up probably being a 5 or 10X. So goes to show crazy that angel investor approached that way. So these things were colliding. And I'm like, this is just dumb. These deals are so easy. There's a couple of things you have to care about, and they're really in two categories. And the two categories that we defined in the book were economics and control. Those are the two categories. That's it. A venture deal is about economics and control. And within economics, there's subpoints of how those economics are determined. And so many founders, the only thing they care about in economics is what's the valuation. And at that time in 2004, if you said to the founder, do you mean pre-money or post-money? A lot of them would say, what do you mean? And then the control part of it was even worse. There's like a whole bunch of shit in a term sheet that's not worth negotiating because it doesn't matter, because they're edge cases, because they've been in term sheets forever. And why are they there? It's because, if someday you're ever a public company, they might matter. Or the VC is too lazy to take that shit out of their term sheet. So it wasn't like advocating for and here's how the control should work. It was, let me explain, in the hierarchy of control, these are the things that can really impact control that you care about as a founder of an early stage company, not just today, but forever. And these things, here's how this could impact control. And doing it in a non-legalistic way. It's not, and here's a whole bunch of lawyer words that you can't understand, so you're going to defer to your lawyer anyway, just like in English. That was the motivation, and that's what, initially were the blog posts. And then that became the seed corn for the book in the same way I described the seed corn for Give First. But it came from me saying, you got to be fucking kidding me. Why am I dealing with this still? And I wasn't a rookie at it, right? I've been doing it since 1996. And I was just stop already. We don't have to spend $50,000 on a seed financing because we have two lawyers who are battling over pick your stupid registration rights. I think the last part of it, which was the feedback, is I did get some, and some of it was tongue in cheek. And I'll put it in the category that I also would put against generating VC content and blogging. So Fred Wilson and I started blogging at about the same time together. We've been good friends for a long time. Jerry Colonna was blogging. Dave Hornick had been writing a blog. There were a couple of VCs who were blogging, but very few. And blogging was not really a mainstream thing yet. It was still sort of emerging, kind of curious with self-publishing and curious with the tools. And I always like to write. And I'm like, this could be a good way to just experiment with technologies. The thing that I regularly heard from other VCs, some version of how do you have time for that? The negative version of how do you have time for that is, man, you must not really be working very hard and doing anything because you have time to blog. It's kind of very pejorative statement. Today, of course, every VC has a platform. Some of it's great, and a lot of it is just not. But that's okay, because it's the through line of, is it normal for people to express themselves clearly if they're in this business? So I give that as the example of what annoyed me. The opacity thing was the same kind of thing. There were a whole bunch of people who challenged, this is a bad idea. And then all of a sudden by 2007 or 8, the phrase founder friendly became super popular. And every VC was founder friendly, including some who are most definitely not founder friendly when things go sideways. They might be founder friendly when they're trying to put money in your company. I kind of view all that from where I sit with mild amusement rather than annoyance and aggravation. And it's all in the context of buyer beware. As a founder, you should be thoughtful and make sure you know who you're partnering with, and making sure that your values are aligned with who you're partnering with, and your motivations and goals have as much alignment as they can have, and that you have a relationship where you can talk as clearly with each other. But watching the shift from 2004 to 2025 is pretty wild.
So let's talk about Techstars for a minute. It's an organization that has changed a lot of lives for the better, mine one of them. You did talk about the origin story of Techstars in the book, and I know that story, maybe others don't. Was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about how Techstars came to be, just because it ties together the concept of the book, Giving First, what was happening in your life at the time, and this organization, which in many ways I think is the crowning achievement of what has been a storied career. So what was that like, the story of meeting David and how Techstars came to be?
It was in 2006. We started Foundry Group in 2007. Foundry Group hadn't been created yet. I was still managing and effectively pretty quickly getting to the point where I was the only person managing the prior funds that I had been a co-founder of with 3 other people that turned into Mobius Venture Capital. I still had a couple of partners at Mobius, but they were working their way out of full-time involvement. And so I was making angel investments again. And I was writing checks with my own money, $25,000, $50,000 checks. Occasionally I'd write a $100,000 check. And I was doing them the same way I had done them before, which was pretty prolifically, kind of one a month. I had a fair amount of visibility in Colorado by this point. And so there's just an endless amount of inbound to get together. And the inbound was random. It was from all over the place. It was, other founders that were local. It was people who were interested in being entrepreneurs. It was people who wanted to meet me. It was somebody that was involved in one of the organizations that Amy and I were funding philanthropically, like just all of these endless inbounds. And I think most people will get this. The emails start with, I'd love to get together with you for coffee, or I'd love to get together with you for lunch or dinner, or I'd love to get together with you for a meeting. And like, if my answer to those things were yes, all I would ever do is have coffee, lunch, dinner, and meetings. I was on a lot of boards for Mobius at the time. I was doing angel investments. I was involved in some other stuff. I mean, I had a lot of work to do. And I also, at the same time, prided myself on being accessible. I tried to respond to every email. I wasn't somebody who had gatekeepers. You didn't have to email my assistant. In between my day, I'd jam in a 30-minute phone call here, or I'd get together with somebody at the tail end of a thing there. By this point, I was getting better at adhering to the boundaries of a calendar, but I viewed most of the ending times for meetings as optional was the right word. The end time was optional and the start time was optional, which basically meant I was late to everything. And at some point, I realized the cognitive overhead of all the switching was getting to me. And so I said, you know what, fuck it. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to do a thing called Random Day. Once a month, I'm going to have 15-minute meetings with all of these random people. And I'm going to fully engage. It's going to be for them. It's not for me. Eventually, I got a little bit bored of that. And I decided that, okay, the key is I need to learn one thing and I need to figure out one thing to help the person with in 15 minutes, which got rid of the boredom. Like all of a sudden I could concentrate because I had a goal for the meeting. And I created an online calendar back before there were online scheduling systems for things like this. And I just kind of said to the world through my blog, like, sign up if you want to get together. The backlog was not trivial. It was like a 2 or 3 month backlog. And one day I'm sitting in my Random Day meeting. And, what happens is somebody comes in and I said, look, next 15 minutes of my life belong to you. Let's go. Talk about whatever you want. So David Cohen, who I don't know, shows up. And he's like, Random Day meeting number 5. Most of these days had 15 to 20 meetings on them. So pretty long days. And I said, hey, nice to meet you. The next 15 minutes belongs to you. Let's go. And he slid across a piece of paper to me on the table that had a very old, the very original Techstars logo, which looked like it had been something that somebody took to a copy shop and color printed a cheap ass brochure. And he started to talk to me. I said, David, don't talk to me. Let me read it. You went to the trouble of doing this. I can't listen and read at the same time. So I read it, and it described pretty clearly what he wanted to do with Techstars. And it essentially laid out the very simple, like, we're going to put a little bit of money into 10 companies. We're going to get them all to Boulder. They're not going to be all Boulder companies. They'll be from all around the country. We'll get some space. We'll spend full time with them. We'll try to help them as much as we can. We'll find some other people to help, and we'll own a little bit of the company, and we'll see what happens. That was the pitch. And I read it, and I said to him something like, this sounds great. Cool. I'm happy to help. Tell me what you're looking for. And he said, well, I'm putting some funding together. He said, I'm putting in $80,000. I think my business partner, David Brown, will put in $50,000, but he wants me to find some money from some other people to validate it. And when we add up all the money that we need to put together, we need another $100,000. And I said, cool, I'm in for $50,000 as long as you're not a flake or a crook. And I'll figure that out pretty quickly with a couple of emails. And I said, you know what, hang on a sec. And we're like minute 6. I walk out of the room. I walk into another room. I call Jared Polis, who's a close, longtime friend, one of the first people I met when I moved to Boulder. And Jared is a very, very successful entrepreneur. He's now governor of state of Colorado. And I said, hey, Jared, I'm putting $50,000 into this thing called Techstars. Can I tell you about it? And his response was, count me in for $50,000. What is it? And, I gave him a 60-second thing. And he's like, David's still coming up with it, but here it is. He's like, well, that sounds great. Let's do it. And I said, cool, I'll call you back. I got David in the other room, walked into the other room. And I said, David, all right, Jared Polis is going to put the other $50,000 in. And that was it. And so it's a good example. Like, would I have gotten connected with him at some point? Could that have come together without a Random Day? Sure, maybe. I don't know. But I could give hundreds of examples of things like that happen in my life that way. And there's a lot of threads through it, right? It's not just I was willing to do Random Day and meet with whomever, but I was also willing to make a commitment on the spot to something that sounded interesting to me. It was that I was open to being interested to something on the spot. It was that I didn't say to David, and what school did you go to? And tell me what your resume is. And can I make sure I do diligence on you before I get excited about this thing? Who else is involved? I need some validation from something else, da, 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 da.
here's this big thing. Certainly most people in the startup world around the globe know a lot about and think highly of Techstars. And to think that the catalyst was you giving, and I don't know how many meetings you did on random days, but I think from that one interaction alone, it has paid you back far beyond whatever it is.
And economically and non-economically. Like,
yeah.
The life experience that I've had with Techstars over the last 18 years has been incredible.
Yeah.
And Techstars also, 18 years, long time to run a thing. So Techstars has its ups and downs. We've made a lot of mistakes. We've done a lot of things that were not successful. We've tried plenty of things that we learned from, that we evolved. We started it from a perspective of being very open about how it worked. I think looking back on it, even with the ups and downs and all the challenges along the way, the impact on founders, on companies, on value systems, the economic returns have been very, very good. The second order effects of those economic returns, where people who have generated real wealth have then turned around and with those values that were imbued in them, continued to do things that accelerated and advanced their startup communities or the next generation of entrepreneurs, or did things that were additive back to all the things that were going on. Just awesome to sort of reflect on. I have said for a long time that my motivation and my reward is highly intrinsic. And for me, the intrinsic reward is learning, is working out ideas, figuring things out, experiencing them, having to work hard at trying to figure out what's right, what I screwed up, how to make it better, how to work through it. And even if in the end, the thing is a failure, as a functional object, whatever the functional object is, if I learned along the way, I generally get meaningful intrinsic reward. Interliant would be a good example. Interliant was a financial failure for me. I got no money out of that thing. I had a very, very large ownership value. When the thing's worth $3 billion, even if you have only a couple percent of the company, that's a big number. And I had that on paper and it went to zero. And then I got sued for fraud for $150 million at a time when people were going to jail. In the end, it wasn't fraud, and it was just, we failed. And that's legal, fortunately, in the United States to fail. But the amount I learned from that experience was unbelievable. And it's been so helpful. Starting point of this discussion, they can't kill you. Eat you, right?
Although sometimes it does feel like they can kill you and eat you in that moment, even if it's not true.
Just so I'm not being coy about it. I've had my share of 4 a.m. in extreme distress moments, laying in bed, not knowing how to get through the thing. I don't have a temper. I'm not an angry person. I don't get spun up. I don't get hostile towards people. It's just not my nature. But I do have an anxiety streak in me. For many years, I struggled with navigating and modulating how I felt internally. And some of that pressure generated a lot of anxiety, would eventually, if it built up too much and I couldn't navigate it, would generate depressive episodes. So, it's not like, oh yeah, everything's rosy and all the time, because they can't kill you and they can't eat you. But that touch point of I will get through this. I'm going to figure out how to navigate myself. And then maybe one other thing on this is I do believe that when the lights go out, it's over. And, when you die, you're dead. But the end point of my existence is uncertain. And one day I'm not going to be here anymore. And so it's not that you get through everything. The cliche I heard a long, long time ago, life is a fatal disease. And if you can kind of make peace with that, it allows you to create enough detachment from the really rough stuff so that you can actually start to maneuver through it versus be paralyzed by it.
Yeah. It's maybe lessening the severity of what the true consequences really are. But in that moment, yeah, it's difficult. So look, we're kind of veering into issues around conflict and mental health. You have been at the forefront of mental health issues and entrepreneurship for a long time. You've written extensively on the subject. You've taken a proactive role in causes to support people in this way. And you have been extremely open about your own challenges with depression. You once referred to depression as the complete absence of joy. And in some of your other writing, you wrote the following: leaders and entrepreneurs are programmed to never show weakness. I was afraid people wouldn't take me seriously or would stop respecting me if I talked about how bad I was feeling. The only people I openly talked about it with was my business partner, Dave Jilk, and my girlfriend, now wife, Amy Batchelor. They were amazingly supportive, but even then I was deeply ashamed about my weakness. Later, you said, if I didn't continue to write openly about my experience with depression, I'd be being deceitful by not including the full emotional range that I was dealing with. So I want to ask you 2 questions on the opposite end of this. Why did you start writing about this? How has it helped people on one hand? What was gained? But on the other hand, I'm just curious, was it ever used against you? Did it ever backfire?
Yeah, did it ever backfire? I don't think so. Certainly not that I'm aware of. I'm sure there are people who have had fun talking about it in a way that satisfies their own needs to deal with, whatever they're afraid of or whatever they're dealing with or their own insecurities in a negative way, right? Oh, look at that guy over there. He's talking about how he can't handle the anxiety. He's such a whatever. I'm sure there's, whatever in the world, but never something that really impacted me in a substantial way. The inverse was the amount that I've encountered on the positive side from people, especially in confidence, where people were just uncomfortable. Like, you're the first person I've ever been able to talk to about this stuff, from people who are extremely well known, famous entrepreneurs, famous other people that are not entrepreneurs. I mean, I've had a lot of those interactions over the years, especially when I was being most open about it in the middle of a depressive episode and sort of talking about what I was going through. So used against me, I don't feel like it has been. And frankly, I don't give a shit. Hey, you don't want to work with me because I talk about my emotional state? Cool. Then I probably don't want to work with you. And that's okay. I don't have a goal of working with everybody. It's totally fine if I'm not somebody's cup of tea because of the way that I engage. The motivation for it, I think there were 2 things that collided. One was I got very depressed in 2013, and I was depressed for about a little bit under 6 months. And it came out of the blue. My life was going great. I mean, work was great. Foundry was doing great. My relationship with Amy was great. I was really enjoying my work with my business partners. Techstars was exciting. I just wore myself out, which is a common dynamic for me, which is that I just really wear myself out physically, physiologically, emotionally, intellectually. I'm just exhausted. Dragging my ass all over the country, traveling all the time, always out in public, never sort of recharging my battery. My inner introvert, I'm sure, was screaming at me to get my shit together. And this was the way it finally got me to get my shit together, which is it threw me into a deep depression. And when the depressive episode came on, I had been blogging every day about all kinds of things, including a bunch of personal stuff. And I kind of wrote this blog post that wandered up to how I was feeling. I was heading to North Carolina for a trip, for a board, for a company called Avid Exchange. And I really just didn't want to go. I came back and I'm like, you know what? I'm depressed. If I don't follow through with what's going on here, I'm really bullshitting the people that are reading this stuff. That's inconsistent in a way that doesn't work for me. So that was kind of motivation number 1. Motivation number 2, which was starting to happen even at this point in time, was there were a lot of people who were writing about a lot of stuff around entrepreneurship and venture capital and startup communities and different technologies. Today, the word I would use is grin fucking. Because there's just an extraordinary amount of grin fucking and misdirection going on in what people say today. But it was happening. There was a lot of people who were saying things that were, put your label on it, as performative, so they didn't really mean it. It was a distraction from what was really happening. It was, you knew there was something deeper, but they were coding it with happiness and goodness when there was something deeper and darker in there. And there's some really sad stories that have emerged. I mean, Tony Hsieh's story is a good example of a sad story that emerged from that, just in terms of what the surface level is versus what's happening below the surface level. Those 2 things collided. I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. I'll just write about this stuff. And if it helps somebody, great. And like a lot of other things that I wrote about, they weren't prepared, well thought out. It was kind of my extemporaneous writing. And the things I learned from was the feedback, right? But it was really the emails from people that were sending me long emails with their stuff that then resulted in some phone calls. And some that were really profound. I mean, I remember a conversation with Paul English, who's been very open about his own struggles with bipolar disorder, and incredibly brave what Paul did, which is he allowed Tracy Kidder to follow him around. And Tracy wrote a book called A Dump Truck Full of Money or something. I can't remember the name of the book. It's a great book. Tracy Kidder's an amazing, amazing writer. And Paul's like, yeah, here it is. And this is what it's like to be a successful entrepreneur with bipolar disorder. And some of it's good and some of it's really not good. I think that for me actually was incredibly helpful because it let me work through and navigate through what was going on in a way that I might not otherwise have even been able to start doing. Didn't solve anything. I ended up doing a decade of therapy that coincided with that depression I got. But I don't know if I would have done that if I hadn't allowed myself to revisit this thing that was episodic for me. I would get depressed. I used to kind of get completely worn out at the end of the year. And I just say, I'm just tired. I hate Christmas. I'm a Jewish kid, didn't grow up with Christmas. Christmas is stupid. It's been a busy year. Everybody takes time off. I feel totally disoriented because nobody answers my emails on Christmas Day when I'm sending emails to them about what's wrong with their product as I'm trying to give them feedback. I come up with some bullshit rationalization for what was just basically I was depressed. And eventually when I confronted, I'm like, well, I don't really like being depressed. Let me try to figure out what's going on here so that maybe it'll happen, but let me at least start to deal with the issue.
Yeah. Well, I know it's helped a lot of people, myself included. I definitely want to discuss your relationship with Amy. Most business leaders keep their personal lives private. And if they do talk about it, it's all too often filled with backwards looking regrets, missed opportunities with the people that you say are the most important to you. But I feel like you've been very different, right? You've been open about your marriage, your personal life, your relationships. I think a lot of folks have benefited from that. Was that an intentional choice for the two of you to be open about not just your personal life, but your working relationship, whether it's through the book, Startup Life, which we haven't talked too much about? It's actually the first book I recommend to founders, that they have a conversation with their spouse about what they're about to go through. You're basically married to a crazy person and you need to understand what that's like. Through the Anchor Point Foundation, we touched on that earlier. Yeah, just say a little bit about that. What can others learn from you?
Sure. The word intentional is a really good one because I think that was the essence of how we've approached our relationship, which is that we decided relatively early on that we would be intentional about working on and having a successful relationship, partnership. And it was an equal partnership. We're equal partners in our marriage. It was not one where there was power dynamic around anything. It was one where we knew that there would be difficult things because the course of life always has challenges, whatever those are. They could be individual challenges. They could be challenges for the couple. They could be challenges that were aging parents, challenges with friends, challenges with your own internal dynamics and belief systems. I would say at about year 10, after a decade together, we really had a low point in our relationship. And that low point generated a very intense set of conversations over a period of time. And it helped me understand part of what was causing us to be in a low point, which was my words and my actions didn't match up. And specifically, I would tell Amy she was the most important person in my world. And then in the middle of dinner, the phone would ring and I'd say, hang on a second, I'd answer the phone. And that's not words and actions linking up, right? I was chronically late to events for us together, going out to dinner or whatever. There was a lot of, hey, I know I said we do this, but I can't. And of course, what that made her feel at that moment, it was really a huge aha for me, was it made her feel that she wasn't the most important person to me or the most important thing to me. At the moment, it was really a hurtful kind of thing. So I give that as one example of many where we then said, all right, well, let's be more intentional about our dynamics together. Let's not do it in a way that's artificial. And I said, look, I got an engineering brain. So let's just come up with some rules and some structure. And so we started doing things like what we called life dinner, which was not date night. It was on the first day of every month. We'd go out to dinner together and we'd exchange gifts. And for those of you that are software people, you'll recognize this. We would do a retrospective of the prior month, and then we do scrum planning for the next month. And, sometimes those conversations were short, like 5-10 minutes, because we were pretty synced up. And sometimes they were not. And sometimes there were tears. And sometimes it was really hard. But we gave ourselves room to have the emotional range as we were being intentional. I did a thing that was really hard for me, which is starting around 2001. Every quarter, we went away for a week on vacation somewhere, and I left my computer and phone behind. So completely off the grid for a month. And sometimes I came back to it wasn't too bad. And sometimes I came back to it was a real mess. But we still got like that time together that allowed us to be together, which, by the way, I mean, she's the person I want to spend time with more than anybody else on the planet.
That's a really sweet way to end. I've got one last question. So in the dedication of your new book, Give First, you wrote the following: Len Fassler, whom I think of and miss every day, for providing the elemental fire that forged my philosophy about how to behave in business relationships. The same kind of mentor that Len was to you, you've been that same kind of mentor and force in so many other people's lives, mine included. When you think about the ripple effects of your work through Techstars, through writing, all of the numerous personal relationships, what's the message or mantra you hope that the next generation of leaders who have been shaped by your example carry forward with them as they shape the generation after that?
Is that a setup for me just saying, give first?
There it is. It's perfect. That's it. Okay.
That's what I got.
Okay. So, Brad, we're almost out of time, but we'd like to close with a few quick hit questions and a segment that we call Beyond the Bio. Are you good with that?
Yep.
Okay. Other than they can't kill you and can't eat you, what's a quick piece of advice from a mentor that stuck with you throughout your journey?
As a teenager, my dad said to me, if you're not standing on the edge, you're taking up too much space. And that was really helpful to me as a 12 or 13-year-old. It basically said, take risks.
Yeah, I love that. Who is an unsung hero in your life, and what has been the impact they've had on you?
You mentioned Warren Buffett earlier. I don't know Warren Buffett. I don't have a relationship with him. I've always been really fascinated and intrigued by him. And his partner, Charlie Munger, resonated with me in many ways in business and how I think about things. Not following how they do it, but just the approach and the way that he thinks about it intellectually and what he cares about or doesn't care about.
Yeah. A lot of people would agree with that and their partnership. So who's someone in your local startup community or broader network who doesn't get enough credit and deserves a shout out?
Brad Bernthal. Brad Bernthal is a professor at CU. He has been integral to the fabric of all things in the Boulder startup community. He's a law professor who understands and loves entrepreneurship. He is not a forward-first leader. He leads from support. And he's just a magnificent, magnificent person that is incredibly dedicated to a wide variety of people, his students, his friends, his family, and the startup community.
Yeah, I like that one. Brad's a great guy. Tell us something most people don't know about you, something outside of work, like a hobby, travel spot, guilty pleasure, hidden talent.
I was once named the most famous entrepreneur that was born in Arkansas by Business Insider, which amuses me to no end because there's some guy named Sam Walton that was born in Arkansas.
I think I heard it.
You may have heard that. So that one I've used. I've said enough times now that it's known that I was born in Blytheville, Arkansas. Another is one of my absolute favorite things to do on planet Earth is to sit with my dad and have chocolate ice cream.
Yes.
Have a Blizzard at Dairy Queen. That, like when you say guilty pleasure, it's to have a chocolate extreme Blizzard with my dad in Dairy Queen, sitting in the plastic booth. It is such a guilty pleasure.
I was always more of a peanut butter parfait guy, but I'll take it.
That's junk, garbage, waste of calories.
What are one or two songs you'd add to our Spotify Founders playlist? Something that fuels your workday or has inspired you as an entrepreneur?
Well, I am stuck in my teenage years, so my soundtrack is on repeat. Regular rotation is Pink Floyd, Rush. When I write, I have a playlist called Writing. And that playlist is on Spotify. It has 4 things on it. It's Dark Side of the Moon, followed by Wish You Were Here, followed by Animals, followed by Metal. And at the end of that, I often make it to the end of Animals if I'm writing. Sometimes I make it to the end of Metal. But what I find is that by starting, before Breathe is Over, the first song, I am comfortably in writing mode, which is really hard to do. Like it usually takes like 15 or 20 minutes to like launch yourself into it. And I've done this so many times. And it's very funny. Like if I'm in the car with Amy and she puts Dark Side of the Moon on to listen to, I'm like, where's my laptop? I got to write. I'm ready to go. You know?
I wonder if you remember for a hot second, we were going to write the Entrepreneur's Daily Pink Floyd. I think it lasted for about 2 weeks.
I do.
Maybe we should revive that. Actually, the first album I got from my dad was Dark Side of the Moon. So that was my first CD. So yeah, good memories there. Okay, last question. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's about to start their first company, particularly someone who's maybe a bit of an outsider, what would it be?
I would say you're about to embark on a really awesome journey that's going to be incredibly, incredibly hard. No matter what happens, allow yourself to embrace the journey, regardless of what the outcome is.
That's a great way to end. Brad, this was a really special conversation, not just because of what we shared, but because of how much your mentorship and example have meant to me personally over the years. Thanks, as always, for being so generous with your time and wisdom. I'm excited to share this with our listeners. There's a ton more we could have talked about, believe it or not. So would love to have you back sometime so we can do this again.
Anytime I get a chance to spend a couple hours in the middle of the day with you instead of answering emails is a good day.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
See ya.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Outsider Inc. A huge thank you to Brad Feld for joining us to share his infinite insights and wisdom. Earned not just as an iconic investor and entrepreneur, but as a mentor, writer, community builder, and a champion of outsiders everywhere. Brad's journey is a testament to the power of giving first. From co-founding Techstars to authoring venture deals in startup communities, Brad has made the world of startups more accessible, more collaborative, and more human. He's shown that entrepreneurial ecosystems thrive not because of any single company or person, but because of the people with a love of place who commit to helping others succeed. What stands out to me most is Brad's willingness to invert the spotlight, to make the work not about himself, but about the people and systems he's helped shape. His Give First philosophy isn't just a hashtag. It's a way of operating that has created ripple effects far beyond what any single company or career could achieve. And as we heard today, behind all that impact is a deeply thoughtful, kind, and generous human being. If you want more from Outsider Inc., don't forget to subscribe to the platform at outsiderinc.substack.com. It's packed with highlights from today's episode and bonus insights you won't want to miss. You can follow Outsider Inc. on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn at Outsider Inc. Pod. You can also follow me on X at Ian Hathaway. Outsider Inc. is produced by Spellbinder Media. We'll be back soon with another fascinating outsider conversation. Until then, thank you so much for listening. And remember, great entrepreneurs can come from anywhere. See you next time.